enough on that. You can see I'm obsessive. I'm passionate about passion. Risk and reward. You know, it's hard to be a leader if you're going to stand on the sidelines. There's a lot to observe, and it's really important for us to have observers, chroniclers. I'm not saying being a leader is not the only way to go, for sure. But for those of us that have found ourselves consciously or unconsciously as leaders, and I'd say I've largely found myself as a leader unconsciously, you know, I found myself as a leader unconsciously, I guess, through this back door of my attraction, my sensitivity to the fact that you, in order to get some places you might want to go, you have to be willing to take that step. So, and I may talk about this more a little later, I was reflecting back on this as I was trying to come up with, well, what are three or four generic things. I spoke at my undergraduate graduation at UC Santa Barbara, and in the math and science graduation. And the speech I gave when I was 20 years old, the topic really was risk and reward. So that was it. And it was all about, to a bunch of people graduating and leaving a college experience, how I really wanted to challenge myself, and along with it, my classmates, the idea that, you know, it boils down to the very simple, you know, thing you might needlepoint and your grandmother might hang up, which is nothing ventured, nothing gained. And so it was really an encouragement, and it's been important to me that consider taking the adventure, taking the steps. And one of the things I'm going to elaborate on is, because that's how you get rewards. That's how you, whether it's it's exploring things, trying to make a difference in the world, whatever that might mean to you, you won't be able to get there unless you're willing to take a risk. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is there are many strategies for managing those risks and still getting the reward. You know, you don't want to just walk blindly into situations where you're exposing yourself in ways that probably don't make sense. So I think over the course of my checkered adventures, I feel like I've learned a lot about how to still take the risks, but really manage and hedge them, because I really want the sense of progress. And I enlist other people to help me get there as well, which we'll talk about. So that's the last point, which is I would not be a successful leader. And I doubt there are very few successful leaders who can really do it on their own. And so a key leadership attribute, in my mind, is the ability to attract, and attracting them is not enough. You've got to keep them. So part of it is the skill of who do I want out there who can help me do what it is I need to get done and complements my skills and my ability to do it. But then you have to inspire them. You have to bring out the best in them in a way that involves, you have to have the capacity to have an ego that facilitates that, where you're really willing and excited to bring out the best in the people around you. So that's probably a big topic all into itself. So after I came up with these four, I started thinking of a whole bunch of other interesting attributes. I said four is enough for one. And there's some merit to what are the first four good ideas that you have. So these ideas I just talked about, I view as generic. And it's important for all of us in our leadership paths. You may pick 3 or 4 or 5 universal, what you believe are universal truths. These are just the 4 I came up with. But a really important part of being a conscious or unconscious leader, I think, is taking a deep breath and reflecting on who the hell am I? And how do I play to my strengths? And I think, you know, a lot of people talk about the blur between nature and nurture, meaning how much of who you are is a result of your chipset, your genetic wiring, your personality type, what an astrologist would say based on your birth date you are, all those kinds of things, versus what's the environment you've grown up in. And for each of us, this is a very, very intensely personal story. But the truth is, it's important not to just shove that all under the carpet, because it happened to you. There's a digital track there, and there's aspects of that if you recognize it, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, and you own that, then you know who to bring in to work with you, and you know what kind of situations to avoid and where you think you're in a good place. So this is kind of interesting for me to reflect on. Again, I hadn't really taken inventory before about, so what is my nature? And many people who know me well would say, I don't have a middle name actually, but if they had to come up with a middle name for me, the words Catalyst, connector, and collaborator would all get jammed in there some way, and different people, if I grabbed 50 people who knew me really well, they'd probably evenly distribute amongst those. The catalyst comes in pretty hard, which is, so some leaders are not as good at the catalyst part, which is starting, building, incubating, lighting the fuse to get other people to then jump on and make things happen. They're better at the middle stage or the later stage efforts. I tend to be better at the early stage. And then I have to bring in other people to help me discipline it, tame it, shepherd it as it moves forward. I don't like competition. I really like hitting tennis balls, but I can't keep score to save my life. I don't have a big competitive, I want to beat out somebody else. So as a leader, I'm not like taking on IBM. Anything I've started where people would tag me as a leader has not been about I'm going to compete with something. It's been about I'm filling a hole. And that hole resonates with my soul about things I care about, whether it's teaching energy at Stanford, whether it's figuring out how to build an investment firm that's completely different than the average bear, if you will, or how to fill holes I see at Stanford around energy and environment, which I care about really deeply. So when most people think of investment firm, they think of people on Sand Hill Road around here. And one of the ways I screen my partners of who I'm going to bring in to work with me is, are you going to be happy if we never have an office on Sand Hill Road? And there's a whole bunch of people around here who really want to be up there. And so there's kind of a sorting hat for what kind of person are you? And it's just recognizing. And in general, so my firm, I've been asked 100 times over the last 20 years to be interviewed in national magazines and do things like that. And a really conscious part of building my firm and a lot of other things we do is I don't want any press. I'm very comfortable being behind the scenes. And that's not true of everybody. So I'm sharing this not to toot my horn. It's just to say this is my profile. So given what my profile is, if I can own that and be clear on it, then I know how to align myself with things I care about and how to approach them. And again, to align myself with people who think similarly are going to be okay. There's an example right now of a woman I would really like to bring into our firm, or I have this gut instinct that, that's another good one. Trust your gut sometimes, at least explore it. But I'm, in a role she's been in previously, she's been doing a lot of public speaking that's very highly visible. And would she be comfortable in a firm setting that's much more, again, behind the scenes and anonymous? And that's an interesting thing to ask. I've already, I think, made the point that I'm attracted to niches and filling holes. I am the lovely woman who helped make these slides look beautiful for me. The word I had in there says, I'm a beaver. And she's like, Jane, that's not very, but what I meant by that is I am just like, I am tenacious. And that has, when I go into my 3 stories just a little bit more, you'll see that that's been very important. And the combination of being, relentlessly tenacious and optimistic at the same time has been a nice alchemy for me, nice combination. My partner pointed out to me when I was asking him, well, how should I think about this? He said, the fact, on everything I've done, one of the things he pointed out, he said, a lot of people don't know how to take responsibility for their actions. At the end of the day, whether you have one person leading you or 70 or however many, if you're leading the charge, you have to be prepared to deal with the consequences of what you're doing and take responsibility for it. And I guess I'm so unconscious about that, I probably wouldn't have put that up there. But my partner, who I admire greatly, said, that's a really important, he thinks that's an important aspect of my nature that's worth sharing in terms of what has made me successful. Environment. All of us have really fascinating, I love hearing people's stories about, I have a joke that I'm going to publish a free bumper sticker that make available to everybody, so maybe I'll finally do it. It's going to say, who needs fiction? Because real life is full of such exotic stories of the things that have happened to all of us, all our life paths. And as I said, that has a lot to do with who we are and what we want to do and how we want to make a difference in the world. In my case, there's kind of a double whammy that's had a profound effect on me, which is I'm the oldest child in my family, and my parents died at a young age. That forced me into a leadership capacity where as a teenager, I ended up being my brother's parents. And I ended up being the steward of 2 grandmothers. So you could argue that forcing function didn't give me a choice, really. It probably did, but it was it pushed me along and it worked. And so I ended up taking a lot of responsibility at a young age. I bet many of you have as well in different situations you didn't plan on in your teen time or college time or something like that. Another important ingredient for me, I was thinking about this, was having great role models. And some of my role models I never met. They were lore for me. So one of the ones I like talking about is my great-grandfather started a company. It's called Intermatic, and they make some of you, or if you go home, your parents have these little things they plug in the wall, and then they plug their lamp in it. It's a little mechanical timer, and it's set so that you can dial. It's a very primitive device, really, and it hasn't changed in 50 years. And it basically allows your lights to come on at a certain time and go off at a certain time. So my great-grandfather conceived of this, a really long time ago. And I never met him, and he sounded like an interesting guy. I was like, oh, I have an entrepreneur in my family. That sounded interesting. My grandfather, so his son, was supposed to run that company. And he went to school in engineering, and he went to, he went to a really good school in engineering. So that was part of the lore. There's these people in my family that have had the privilege, which not everybody does, of going to these really good schools. So it's like, ooh, school's important. And my grandfather, who died before I was born as well, was going to be an engineer, because that's what his father wanted to do. And then one day he said, the heck with it. I'm not interested in that. I want to be a sociologist. And he ended up being the first sociology professor at Cornell. And I thought, that's cool. I never met him, but I love the fact that he had the guts to, rotate from what his dad's big plan was, and that he had identified his compass, which was, there was no precedent for, which was to go off. And this was in the first sociology professor at Cornell, and he co-authored the first sociology textbook in this country. It's like, that's cool. So even though I never met these people, the fact that it was in my lineage and I heard stories about it, not a lot of stories, but when I look back on it, that empowers